At a lavish wedding, the groom decided to humiliate the bride by throwing a wedding cake in her face. He expected laughter and a harmless reaction, but what happened next shocked everyone. Subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting us know where you are watching from. The grandeur of the Anderson estate was undeniable, nestled in the rolling hills outside the city. The mansion stood as a testament to old money with stately stone columns, perfectly manicured gardens, and an air of silent arrogance that seeped throughout the property beneath crystal chandeliers and the watchful eyes of long-gone ancestors whose portraits lined the walls. The wedding of the year was about to begin. Emily Thompson stood before a massive mirror in the bridal suite, the weight of her wedding gown pressing down on her like an unspoken truth. The dress was exquisite ivory satin with a fitted bodice and intricate beading that shimmered under the soft light. It was the kind of gown designed for a fairy tale, but Emily knew better than to believe in such illusions. She had spent too many years in boardrooms and negotiations to be swayed by mere fantasy. Her reflection revealed a composed woman, her radiant dark skin set against the pale fabric, her hair styled to perfection, but beneath that carefully curated exterior, something inside her felt off. For months, a quiet, unsettling whisper had warned her that this marriage was not built on love. Her fiancé, Michael Anderson, embodied everything high society deemed desirable: tall, refined, well-educated, and, most importantly, descended from generations of wealth and influence. Yet that wealth was dwindling. The Anderson family, once a mighty dynasty, had been struggling for years as their fortune stretched thin behind an elaborate mask of prosperity. In stark contrast, Emily's family, the Thompsons, epitomized modern success. The Thompson name had become synonymous with innovation, technology, and cutting-edge investments. Her self-made billionaire parents had built an empire from nothing and now commanded respect in every sphere they entered. For them, this marriage was a strategic move. Her mother had portrayed it as an opportunity, a merger of old wealth and new power, while her pragmatic father had assured her that love was secondary to compatibility. Love fades, he had repeated, insisting that a solid partnership was what truly endured. And so Emily had agreed. It wasn't that she despised Michael at first. She had even been intrigued by him, his effortless charm, and the quiet confidence with which he carried himself, as if he never needed to prove his worth. But as the months passed, that charm revealed its cracks. There was something in the way he spoke about those unlike him, subtle cutting remarks that left a bitter aftertaste, the way he dismissed her work as a mere hobby, even though she was one of the youngest and most accomplished strategists in her field, and the way he seemed to believe that by marrying her, he was doing her a favor. She had tried to ignore these thoughts, reminding herself that marriages like theirs were common in their world, and that love was not a prerequisite for success. Yet today, as she stood in that room with the weight of her decision staring back at her, she wondered if she had made a mistake. A knock at the door startled her. Her mother entered, first regal as always, wearing a gown only slightly less elaborate than Emily's own. Sarah Thompson was a woman who commanded attention without effort, and behind her, Emily's father, Robert Thompson, stood with his usual composed expression and sharp eyes that assessed his daughter with quiet intensity. "You look perfect," Sarah said, adjusting a curl near Emily's temple. "Everything is going exactly as planned." Emily forced a smile. "Of course," her father said as he stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Are you ready?" It was a loaded question. She wasn't, but she nodded anyway. Moments later, she descended the grand staircase, every eye in the room turning toward her. Michael stood at the altar, his expression unreadable. He looked handsome, of course, tailored suit, polished shoes, the very image of sophistication. And yet, when she reached him and he took her hand in his, there was no warmth. The ceremony became a blur. Vows exchanged, rings slipped onto fingers, polite applause filling the space. They kissed briefly, rehearsed and devoid of passion, and just like that, it was over. Mrs. Emily Anderson. The reception was held in the sprawling gardens of the Anderson estate, beneath a canopy of twinkling lights. Champagne flowed freely, laughter echoed through the air, and guests flitted from table to table, basking in the spectacle. Emily played her part flawlessly, smiling in all the right places, accepting congratulations with practiced grace, yet beneath the surface, she felt as if she were watching her own life unfold from a distance. Michael, on the other hand, thrived. He was in his element, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with the elite, slipping effortlessly into conversations about politics, finance, and the state of the world. He made no effort to include her, not that she expected him to. Standing near a fountain, momentarily alone, she overheard a hushed conversation between two older guests, business associates of Michael's family. "Smart move on his part," one said, swirling his whiskey, tying himself to the Thompson empire. "This girl has the kind of money that could keep the Anderson name relevant for another century." The other man chuckled. "He thinks he is getting a husband, but he is really getting an investment." Emily felt a stirring inside her as she turned her gaze back to Michael, watching him laugh at a remark from one of his friends, his hand resting lightly on the shoulder of an old flame who had always lingered too close. Her fingers curled around the stem of her champagne flute. Perhaps she had known the truth all along. This wasn't a marriage, it was a business deal, and she was the asset. The thought made her stomach churn. She had always prided herself on being in control, on dictating the terms, but standing there in the midst of a wedding that was supposed to be hers, surrounded by people who regarded her as nothing more than a stepping stone, she realized she had never been in control at all. Not yet, but that was about to change. The Anderson estate glowed under the weight of its own grandeur. From the outside, the wedding reception appeared flawless, a seamless blend of tradition, wealth, and status. Beneath a vast canopy of twinkling lights, elite guests moved effortlessly, sipping champagne from crystal flutes, their laughter merging with the soft hum of an orchestral quartet. Emily stood among them, her posture poised, her smile effortless, the perfect image of a woman who belonged in this world. Yet beneath the surface, something had shifted within her. She could still hear the voices. The businessman who had so casually reduced her to an investment, she wasn't naive, she had grown up in a world where wealth dictated alliances and marriages were orchestrated for power rather than love. She had accepted that when she agreed to this engagement, but knowing something in theory and experiencing it firsthand were two entirely different matters. Michael hadn't even looked at her since they arrived at the reception. He thrived among these people, slipping through conversations with an almost rehearsed ease, like an actor delivering his lines on stage. He had walked these halls 1,000 times before he was perfectly at home. Yet, as she stood there, a mere fixture in a performance designed to uphold the illusion of an unshakable dynasty, she heard her mother's soft but commanding voice. "People are watching. You must mingle more, there are important people here tonight." Emily's fingers tightened around her champagne flute. "Important? To whom?" Her mother's smile was unwavering. "To you, to your future." Emily exhaled slowly, knowing arguing was futile. Sarah had spent her life navigating rooms like these, understanding the mechanics of power and influence better than anyone. To her, this was not just a wedding reception, it was the beginning of an empire, a strategic move that would ensure the Thompson name held sway in circles older than money itself. And Emily was the piece played across the reception hall. Michael caught her eye and raised his glass slightly, a silent toast, a performance for the onlookers. She returned the gesture automatically, but her stomach twisted at the realization that this was all she could expect from him. A series of gestures, a partnership on paper, yet the cracks in his mask were beginning to show. She saw it in the way he spoke to her family, in the way his politeness felt strained, as if it were an obligation rather than genuine effort. When he greeted her father, Robert Thompson?" The handshake was firm but clipped, their exchange brief. Michael had always been wary of Robert, though he would never admit it aloud, perhaps because Robert was a self-made man who had built his empire from nothing, while Michael had inherited a name that meant less with every passing year, or perhaps because Robert saw through him. "You've done well for yourself, Robert," Michael remarked evenly. "Your father would be proud." For a fraction of a second, Michael's expression flickered with something unreadable before he masked it with an easy smile. "That means a lot," he replied, though his voice carried no warmth. Emily watched the exchange, noting how Michael's jaw tightened ever so slightly before he turned away. She saw it again when he spoke to her younger brother, Jacob Thompson. Jacob had never liked Michael. He had been polite, as expected, but always regarded him with quiet skepticism bordering on disdain. "You're an interesting man, Anderson," Jacob said, swirling his drink. "Not the type I pictured my sister with." Michael's smile remained tight. "And what type did you picture?" Jacob chuckled, remarking about someone who knew exactly what they were getting into. The tension was palpable. Emily recognized the warning in her brother's tone, and she knew Michael did not appreciate being challenged, especially not by someone he considered beneath him. His fingers curled slightly at his side, the only outward sign of irritation, before he let out a short, calculated laugh and excused himself from the conversation. Emily followed his movements as he walked away, downing half his drink in one swallow before handing the empty glass to a passing waiter. He was losing control. She had always suspected his patience was thin and his temper, though hidden behind polished charm, was volatile. She had seen subtle moments before when his frustration slipped through, when his voice sharpened and his grip tightened, but tonight the cracks were wider, and she knew it was only a matter of time before something broke. The evening dragged on as she played her part, smiling, shaking hands, answering questions about their honeymoon plans, their shared future, and their aspirations as newlyweds, while Michael continued his performance, pretending to be the devoted husband, the perfect son-in-law, the charming heir to a crumbling legacy. Yet she knew him now. She noticed the slight downturn of his lips when he thought no one was watching, the flash of irritation when a guest mentioned her success rather than his own, the stiffness in his movements as the night wore on, as if he were holding something back, something dark and simmering beneath the surface. It was when she overheard him speaking with his friends that everything finally clicked into place. She hadn't meant to listen. She was merely passing through the crowd when she caught his voice say, "Smartest move I ever made," in a tone smug enough to send a chill down her spine. His friends laughed. "You make it sound like it's a business deal," one joked. "Come on, Anderson, we all saw it. She's the prize of the century." Emily's breath stilled. "She's an investment," Michael corrected smoothly, "the kind that pays off in the long run." Another ripple of laughter followed, and something inside her went quiet, not anger, not betrayal, but a cold, clear understanding. She had suspected all along, in some unspoken way, that this marriage had never been about love. Hearing him say it so plainly, so openly, without hesitation or shame, shattered every illusion she had clung to. She wasn't his partner, she was merely a means to an end, and in that moment, something inside her hardened. She was not a woman who would allow herself to be used, and if Michael thought this was his victory, he was about to learn how wrong he was. The air inside the Anderson estate was thick with the scent of expensive cologne, rare wines, and the underlying tension between Emily and Michael. The night carried on, with the smooth elegance expected of an event of this scale, soft music, practiced laughter, and the clinking of crystal glasses as toasts were made in their honor. But for Emily, the carefully constructed illusion had begun to crumble. She had spent the last hour moving through the reception, acknowledging guests, nodding at compliments, and answering polite but prying questions about their plans as newlyweds. It was all mechanical now. The warmth she once forced into her expressions had drained away, leaving only the remnants of a practiced performance. Her husband had not spoken directly to her since their stage greeting at the entrance. Not once had she observed him working the room, his expression perfectly set, his voice carrying just the right mix of charm and intellect, but she had seen the way he reacted whenever her name was mentioned in conversation, a slight downturn of his lips, a flicker of something behind his gaze. She was beginning to understand something fundamental about Michael. He had never expected to share the spotlight. As the reception wore on, that understanding became painfully clear. Seated at the head table among key members of both families, the conversation inevitably turned toward finances. Emily had anticipated this. The Thompson name was synonymous with wealth, new wealth, perhaps, but wealth nonetheless. Her family had built their empire from the ground up, dominating both technology and the art world, while the Andersons were a name that once commanded power and now clung desperately to faded prestige. Michael, in his mind, had made the smartest move possible by marrying into the future, yet he had not anticipated that the Thompson family did not give freely. "My wife and I were just discussing how beautifully this evening came together," one of Michael's uncles remarked, swirling his drink. "I imagine it cost a small fortune to orchestrate something of this scale." Emily felt it before she saw it, the slight stiffening in Michael's shoulders, the tension in the air around him. She knew he was waiting for someone, preferably her father, to confirm what he had always assumed, that the Thompson family had footed the bill for this spectacle, that this was yet another generous contribution from his wife's bottomless resources. Robert Thompson, however, was not one to entertain assumptions. "We made sure that the financial responsibilities were split fairly. After all, this is a union of equals." His words were smooth and deliberate, landing like a hammer against glass. Emily did not need to look at Michael to know he was fuming. She could feel the quiet fury emanating from him beneath his carefully composed exterior. For months, he had operated under the belief that marrying her would grant him unrestricted access to Thompson wealth, that whatever financial struggles his family faced would be swiftly alleviated by his new position. This was not the first time Emily had sensed his entitlement. There had been subtle signs along the way, comments about how well off she was, jokes that weren't really jokes about how lucky he was to have found a wife who would never have to worry about anything, and more recently, offhand remarks about her work suggesting that with the kind of money she possessed, she didn't need to devote as much time to her career. He had assumed that, as his wife, she would exist solely as an extension of his ambitions, that her wealth was nothing more than an unspoken dowry to be merged into his own assets. Now, as the reality sank in that the Thompson family did not hand out blank checks even to their own kin, Emily knew he was seething. He recovered quickly, of course. "A partnership is always the intention," he said smoothly, his lips curling into a feigned smile. Yet she heard the sharp edge beneath his words. He was furious. The rest of the table moved on, but Emily remained hyper-aware of the man beside her, of how he clenched and unclenched his jaw and drummed his fingers on the pristine white tablecloth. For the first time that evening, she felt a glimmer of satisfaction after dinner, as guests moved freely throughout the estate, enjoying the various entertainment areas. Some gathered by the open bar, others ventured onto the grand balcony, where a second orchestra played beneath a starlit sky. Emily made her way toward the gardens, needing space to think, when she heard footsteps behind her. "Michael," she murmured softly. Without turning, she knew it was him. He fell into step beside her, silent for a few moments with his hands tucked into his pockets. Then, quietly yet with a note of restrained anger, he said, "I didn't realize your family was so calculating." Emily inhaled slowly, keeping her expression neutral. "Splitting costs fairly, a union of equals," she replied. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "That's an interesting way of putting it." She understood his meaning. He wasn't angry about the money itself, he was angry about what it symbolized by refusing to bankroll the wedding entirely, Her family had made it clear that they were not handing him a key to the vault. Emily turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze. His usual mask of charm had been replaced by something colder. He had spent his life believing he was superior to people like her, and yet here he was, depending on her. She saw the humiliation in his eyes, and she knew then, without a doubt, that this was not a partnership, it was a war. A quiet war waged through sharp words and veiled threats, and the first battle had just been fought. Shortly after, the wedding cake, a towering masterpiece of white and gold, was wheeled onto the main stage under soft lighting. Cutting the cake was a tradition, a symbolic act of unity performed by the newlyweds. Emily had once imagined this moment differently, but now she moved toward the cake as guests turned their attention to the couple of the hour. Michael was already there, waiting with a practiced smile on his lips, but she saw through it all. He was still fuming from their last encounter, still stewing over the fact that she had humiliated him by denying him the financial access he expected, and then by catching him openly demeaning her. He was a man who had always believed he was above consequence, but tonight he was being reminded that even an Anderson could fall. She stepped beside him, careful not to let their bodies touch as cameras documented every movement. A silver knife was placed in her hand, and Michael reached for one as well, their fingers briefly brushing. The weight of the blade between them felt heavier than it should have. Together, they cut through the first layer with a clean, precise motion. Polite applause and bright camera flashes followed. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, the tradition in which the newlyweds feed each other the first bite. Emily hesitated only for a fraction of a second before taking a small piece, carefully balancing it on her fork and lifting it toward his lips. Michael held her gaze as he accepted it, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly as he chewed. Then it was his turn. She had known what was coming from the way he took a much larger piece than necessary, from the way his grip on the cake tightened ever so slightly. In that fleeting moment, she saw it all: his anger, his bruised ego, his need to reclaim power in even the smallest way. Without a moment's hesitation, Michael lifted the piece of cake and shoved it directly into her face. The room fell silent as if time itself had frozen. Thick, sugary frosting smeared across her cheek, her lips, her eyelashes. The cream dripped down onto the delicate lace of her gown. A few guests let out nervous laughs, unsure whether this was part of the show, but Emily wasn't laughing. She stood motionless, letting the silence stretch as the weight of what he had done settled in the air. Michael had expected laughter. He had expected people to brush it off, for her to play along by smiling and wiping away the frosting as if it were a harmless joke. But Emily Thompson was not a woman who tolerated being made a fool of, and tonight Michael Anderson had finally overplayed his hand. Whispers began almost immediately, soft and sharp, like rustling fabric in an otherwise quiet room. Did that just happen? He just threw that cake in her face. That wasn't he playful. That was someone else's glass was hastily set down amid the murmurs. Out of the corner of her eye, Emily saw her father stand up. She saw her mother press a hand against his arm, stopping him before he could take a step forward. Not yet, not here. Emily inhaled slowly, reaching for the napkin left on the table beside her. With steady fingers, she wiped the frosting from her cheek in a slow, deliberate motion. Meeting Michael's gaze, she saw, for the first time that night, something new in his eyes: doubt, uncertainty, and a flicker of realization that perhaps he had made the wrong move. She let the silence linger a moment longer, ensuring everyone in the room felt its weight, then, with quiet, devastating clarity, turned on her heel and walked away. The reception did not recover, not really. People tried to pretend the band resumed playing, the waitstaff continued serving, and guests attempted to shift their focus back to their conversations. But the energy had changed, the illusion had cracked. Emily did not return to the ballroom. Instead, she retreated to the private bridal suite upstairs, where she peeled the soiled fabric of her wedding gown from her body, feeling the weight of the night press down upon her. Standing before a mirror, she stared at her reflection, a woman marked by remnants of what should have been a celebration, a woman who had once believed she could navigate this marriage on her own terms. She should have known better. There was no salvaging this. She had given Michael every opportunity to prove he was trustworthy, and he had proven beyond any doubt that he was not. A knock sounded at the door. Without asking who it was, her mother entered first, followed closely by her father. Sarah's expression was unreadable, though Emily could see a sharpness in her eyes, the kind that surfaced only when something truly unforgivable had occurred. Robert, however, appeared ready to tear through walls. "Darling," Sarah said carefully, "you don't have to make any decisions tonight." But Emily already had. Meeting her mother's gaze in the mirror, she declared, "This is over." For the first time that evening, she felt a glimmer of relief, the final, undeniable confirmation that she would never, ever spend her life with a man like Michael Anderson. She had once believed she could bend the terms of this marriage to suit her, that she could outmaneuver him and control the situation to ensure her own power. But power meant nothing if she allowed herself to be degraded, and Emily Thompson was not anyone's possession. By the time the night ended, Michael would know that, and by morning, the world would know it too. The weight of the frosting still clung to Emily's skin even after she had wiped most of it away. Her once pristine gown bore the marks of humiliation endured before hundreds of guests. She had always been composed, always in control, but this was different. This was a line crossed, an unspoken declaration from Michael that she was not his equal, but his possession, meant to be kept in her place when she dared to challenge him. The room buzzed with conversation as she walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor, each step deliberate, each movement an act of defiance. Guests whispered, their voices hushed but frantic, unsure whether to laugh off what had happened or acknowledge its sheer audacity. Some discreetly gathered their belongings, their expressions tense, as they realized they had witnessed the unraveling of something far more significant than a wedding tradition gone wrong. Behind her, Michael remained standing by the cake, his smirk faltering as the silence around him grew unbearable. He had expected a reaction, but not this. He had expected her to play along, to giggle, to wipe the frosting from her face with a playful shrug, to let the night continue as if nothing had happened. Instead, Emily had done nothing of the sort. She had not yelled, nor thrown the cake back at him. She had not caused a scene. She had simply walked away, letting the silence speak for itself. Passing frozen waiters, guests who quickly averted their eyes, and family members watching her with quiet, burning anger, she made her way upstairs. Sarah and Robert Thompson stood at a distance, their expressions unreadable yet their presence powerfully felt. Emily could see her father's hands clenched into fists at his sides, the barely restrained fury rolling off him in waves. If her mother had not placed a hand on his arm, Robert would have already stormed across the room to make Michael regret every decision that led to this moment. Her brother Jacob was the first to move the moment Emily turned away from Michael. He rose to his feet, his jaw tight and his eyes burning with fire. He didn't say anything, nor ask if she was okay. He already knew the answer. The grand staircase leading to the bridal suite felt longer than it had earlier that evening. With measured grace, Emily ascended each step, fully aware that every eye in the room remained fixed upon her, that every guest was waiting for the next dramatic moment they could gossip about for years. But she would give them none of it. When the doors to the suite closed behind her, it felt like the turning of a page. The room fell silent, as if untouched by the chaos below. The laughter and music from the reception hall were now distant echoes from another world. Emily crossed the room with purpose, approaching the vanity, where a silver-framed mirror reflected her image back at her. The woman in the mirror was no longer a bride, she was something entirely different. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the edge of the vanity to steady herself, not out of fear or sadness, but from the sheer force of all that had led her to this moment. The months of doubt, the quiet humiliations, the realization that she had been convinced she could control this marriage. She had been wrong. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Without waiting for a response, her mother entered first, moving with the same effortless poise she always carried. Sarah's gown shimmered under the soft lighting. Her expression remained composed, yet her eyes burned with quiet rage. Robert followed, closing the door behind them with a presence that filled the room with unspoken fury. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Sarah broke the silence. "You don't have to go back down there." Emily met her mother's gaze in the mirror, and saw not only concern, but something deeper. This was not just about the cake, it was about everything that led to this night. All the warnings she had ignored about handling a man like Michael Anderson. Robert exhaled sharply as he paced to the side of the room, running a hand over his jaw as if trying to contain his anger. Emily had seen her father furious before, but never like this, never with a quiet, controlled, and dangerous rage. Turning to face them fully, she declared, "This is over." Her mother did not flinch, and Robert stopped pacing. Sarah inclined her head, her eyes searching Emily's face for any sign of hesitation or doubt. Finding none, she said, "Good, because if you weren't walking away from this, I would have dragged you out myself." Emily exhaled slowly, some of the tension easing from her shoulders as her mother reached for her hands and gently squeezed them. "You don't have to make a statement tonight," Sarah said carefully, "but tomorrow, when the world wakes up, they need to know exactly where you stand." There would be no carefully worded PR statement or attempts to spin this into something salvageable. You will not be the woman who stays, the wife who tolerates disrespect. You will be the woman who walks away. A sharper, more urgent knock sounded at the door. Robert opened it before Emily could respond, revealing Jacob with a dark expression. "He is coming up here." The room tensed. Sarah let out a soft, tired sigh, as if she had expected this but hoped for a little more time. Robert's jaw locked, and Emily knew without asking that Michael would come, because that was what men like him did. They pushed boundaries, tested limits, and demanded explanations when things didn't go their way. Tonight, he was about to learn that Emily was done giving him any. Straightening her shoulders and smoothing the fabric of her gown where remnants of cake still clung, she turned toward the door with the same effortless poise her mother had always embodied. "Let him in," she said. Jacob hesitated, her father tensed, but Emily had already made her decision. If Michael thought the night wasn't over yet, he was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life, because this was not just about what happened at the reception or the cake, it was about power. And tonight, for the first time, Michael Anderson was about to understand what it felt like to lose it. The door opened before Michael had a chance to knock. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before stepping into the bridal suite, his polished shoes sinking into the plush carpet. The room smelled of vanilla and orchids, a stark contrast to the lingering scent of whiskey and cigars from the reception hall below. His gaze swept over the room, taking in the sight of Emily standing in the center with her gown still stained by the remnants of the cake he had shoved into her face, her expression unreadable. Sarah stood to her right, silent but imposing, and Robert was positioned near the door as a physical barrier between Michael and the only exit. Jacob leaned against the far wall with arms crossed, a quiet warning. Michael had always been good at maintaining control of a room, but this was not his domain. He had come expecting anger, perhaps even tears, yet he was met with something far worse: silence. Clearing his throat, he forced a smile. "I came to talk." Emily did not move or blink, she simply stood there, her posture unnervingly steady. The silence between them was thick and unbreakable. He had expected her to lash out, to confront him in front of her family, to give him something he could twist back on her. But she gave him nothing. His fingers curled into fists at his sides. "Are you really going to do this? Walk away from this marriage over a joke? Over nothing?" His voice was low, barely above a whisper, yet it felt deafening in the quiet room. His jaw tightened, and his composure faltered. "This is ridiculous, Emily. It was just a bit of cake. I was playing along with tradition." Everyone laughed, no one laughed. Her voice was steady and cold, the first words she had spoken to him since walking away, and they landed like a blade against his pride. His nostrils flared slightly, frustration mounting. "So that's it then? You're going to humiliate me in front of everyone? Make a spectacle out of this over nothing?" Her father shifted his stance, an unspoken warning in his presence, but Emily did not need protection. She had already won. She had won the moment she refused to engage, the moment she stripped him of the reaction he craved. Taking just a step closer, she tilted her head slightly and regarded him with a look that bordered on pity. "This was never going to work," she said softly, her voice imbued with quiet, unwavering power. Michael let out a sharp exhale, his mask slipping for a moment before he forced a smirk. "So what now? You think you can just walk away? The world doesn't work that way, Emily. People don't get to rewrite the rules when they don't like them." She smiled a smile unlike any he had seen before. It was warm, it was charming, and it was meant to comfort. It was a smile of certainty. "I already have," she replied, and that was the end. Michael stood for a moment longer, as if waiting for someone to tell him this was real, that she was bluffing. But no one did, because everyone in that room knew the truth. Emily Thompson was done. He turned on his heel and walked out without another word. The door clicked shut behind him, the silence swallowing the space he had occupied. Her mother exhaled slowly, her eyes filling with something unreadable, while her father nodded once, as if confirming what he had always known. Jacob smirked slightly, unsurprised that Michael had left without further resistance. Emily felt the tension drain from her shoulders. It was over, and for the first time in months, perhaps even years, she felt free. The sound of the door closing behind Michael was final. Emily stood in the center of the room, the weight of the night pressing down on her, but not in the way she had expected. She had imagined this moment long before she ever walked down the aisle, long before she allowed herself to be drawn into the illusion of control. She had pictured herself eventually breaking away from him, but never so suddenly, never so completely. And yet, as the silence settled in the bridal suite, there was no doubt in her mind. Her mother was the first to move, stepping toward her with the quiet grace she had carried all her life. Sarah Thompson had never raised her voice or acted impulsively. She had been watching Emily all night, knowing this moment would come. Brushing a stray lock of hair from her daughter's face, her fingers briefly ghosting over the remnants of cake still clinging to her skin, Sarah said, "We'll take care of everything." Her voice was smooth and assured, with no hint of hesitation or concern about what would come next, because she had always known how this would end. She had seen it long before Emily was willing to admit it. Robert lingered near the door, his hands still in his pockets and his expression unreadable. But Emily knew him well enough to understand the depth of his fury. He had restrained himself tonight, holding back from doing what every instinct told him he should do. If Michael had been anyone else, if they had been anywhere else, there would have been no conversation, no confrontation behind closed doors. Robert would have handled things decisively. But this was not about impulsivity. It was about something far greater than a moment of anger. Emily took a slow breath, feeling the exhaustion creep into her bones. "I want it done by morning," she said simply. Sarah's lips twitched slightly, the closest she ever came to showing amusement. Jacob let out a soft laugh as he leaned against the far wall, arms crossed. "Michael is going to wake up tomorrow and find out his entire life fell apart while he was sleeping." Emily met his gaze. "That's the least he deserves," she replied, then turned toward the mirror once more. Her reflection, fractured by the events of the evening, reminded her that she had walked into this marriage believing she could play by the rules. shaped the terms to fit her, and control the situation. But control had never been in her grasp, not in the way she had thought. Michael had believed he held all the power, that she would be like so many other women before her, silent, compliant, willing to endure humiliation for the sake of appearances. He had thought he could diminish her, push her into submission. He had never been more wrong. Stepping away from the mirror, she turned to her father. "Make the calls." Robert nodded once. It was already being handled. Emily knew what that meant. Her father had set things in motion the moment she walked away from the cake table, the moment she made it clear that this marriage would not continue. Sarah had always been the face of their family, but Robert was the force behind it. By the time Michael even realized what was happening, it would be too late. She moved toward the wardrobe in the far corner of the suite, pulling open its doors to reveal the outfits she had brought for a honeymoon that would never occur, designer pieces carefully curated for a life she would no longer live. Without hesitation, she removed the gown from her body, letting it fall in a ruined heap of silk and lace. She reached for something else, something simple and comfortable, an outfit that belonged to her and not to the illusion of the woman she was expected to be. Dressing quickly and methodically, she sensed her mother's silent approval. When she was finished, she turned back to them. "I want to be gone before he even realizes," she said. Her father checked his watch. "We have an hour, maybe less." That was enough. She didn't need to see the aftermath or watch as Michael discovered that the world he had so carefully built for himself had collapsed overnight. By morning, the news would be everywhere. The engagement was broken. The marriage ended before it even began. His business connections, already wavering, would vanish completely. His name, once weighty, would now be synonymous with a man who lost everything in a single night. There would be no recovery. Emily was certain that Michael would try, he would fight, he would rage, he would attempt to regain control by any means, but it wouldn't matter. He had underestimated her, and that was a mistake no one survives twice. She moved toward the door with her mother and brother following closely behind, while Robert was already on the phone, finalizing details in a low, steady tone. Emily didn't look back. She had nothing left to see. As they stepped into the elevator, Sarah finally spoke. "Where do you want to go?" Emily considered the question for only a moment before exhaling. "Anywhere but here." Her mother nodded. "Then that's where we'll go." As the elevator doors closed, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss more. Watch our other videos for more compelling stories, and share this video with someone who might find it interesting. See you next time. 5 years had passed since that fateful wedding day, when everything changed for Emily Thompson and Michael Anderson. The dazzling lights of the Anderson estate and the orchestrated perfection of that ill-fated celebration were now distant memories, replaced by a new reality filled with both regret and transformation. In the years following the dramatic night, Michael Anderson experienced a series of profound ups and downs. His once assumed life of privilege and control had crumbled under the weight of his own arrogance. The business empire he had inherited and tried desperately to salvage began to unravel. Initially, he had been convinced that the incident was merely a minor setback, a blip in an otherwise infallible career. But as months turned into years, the impact of his actions and his inability to address the deep-seated issues in his life grew more apparent. Michael's business ventures, once heralded as the continuation of a storied legacy, faced constant turbulence. Markets shifted unpredictably, and competitors moved in with innovative strategies that outpaced his once revered methods. The lavish dinners and high-stakes negotiations were now replaced by sleepless nights filled with financial losses, public scandals, and the haunting memories of a wedding that had become his undoing. In his personal life, Michael struggled with the isolation that followed his public humiliation. He found himself frequently surrounded by advisors, lawyers, and business associates who offered little more than platitudes. Every boardroom meeting and every negotiation reminded him of that night, the taste of betrayal, the sting of regret. His confidence, once as impenetrable as the walls of the Anderson estate, had been replaced by a bitter introspection. He began to see that his treatment of Emily was not only a grave error in judgment, but also a reflection of his own insecurities. Late at night in his dimly lit study, Michael would pore over old photographs and business documents. Among these relics of the past, he often found himself staring at the image of Emily, the graceful, determined bride who had left that wedding hall with a quiet defiance. The sight of her haunted him, her poised expression, the subtle glow of determination in her eyes, and the hint of sadness that lingered just beneath the surface. It was a reminder of everything he had lost, not just a marriage, but the opportunity to share his life with someone whose strength and success had only grown over time. Despite his wealth and influence, Michael felt a void that no amount of money could fill. The business setbacks eventually forced him to take stock of his life. He began attending therapy, not just as a business leader, but as a man deeply remorseful for the choices he had made. For the first time in his life, he confronted his shortcomings, his pride, his inability to value love over legacy, and the superficiality that had governed his relationships. The journey was painful. There were days when the weight of regret nearly crushed him, days when he questioned whether he could ever find redemption. Through it all, Michael clung to a single hope: to find Emily Thompson again. Not just to win back what he had lost, but to ask for forgiveness and, if possible, to begin a journey of healing together. At first, the idea seemed far-fetched. Emily had vanished from the public eye after that wedding. She had retreated to a distant city on the West Coast, where she had built a thriving business empire of her own. Rumors circulated in the industry that she was now the CEO of a cutting-edge tech firm specializing in sustainable innovations, and that her name had become synonymous with integrity and success in her own right. In a vibrant, bustling metropolis far from the familiar grounds of her past, Emily Thompson had reinvented herself. The once branded bride, scarred by the humiliation of her wedding day, had transformed into a formidable businesswoman. She had set her sights on building something entirely of her own, a venture that combined her brilliant strategic mind with a passion for environmental sustainability. With a modest investment and relentless determination, she founded Verity Innovations, a company dedicated to developing eco-friendly technologies that not only promoted green energy but also improved everyday living for millions of people. The journey had not been easy. There were countless sleepless nights, relentless pitches to investors, and moments of doubt when the stakes seemed insurmountable. But Emily's perseverance paid off. Verity Innovations quickly gained traction, and within a few short years, it became a market leader. Emily was celebrated as a visionary, and her success stood in stark contrast to the fading prestige of the Anderson legacy. As her company grew, so did her reputation as a strong, independent woman. She was invited to speak at conferences, appeared on influential podcasts, and became a mentor to young entrepreneurs. Yet, despite all the accolades and achievements, there was one chapter of her life that remained painfully unresolved: the wedding, the bitter memories of that day, and the man who had once promised her a life of wealth and status. Emily never spoke publicly about that day, choosing instead to focus on her work and on building a future that was distinctly her own. In quiet moments, however, when she was alone in her high-rise office overlooking the glittering city, she allowed herself to remember, not with anger, but with a calm acceptance, that it was a part of her journey, a painful lesson that had ultimately fueled her transformation. Over time, the public narrative of that wedding faded into obscurity, replaced by the story of a brilliant entrepreneur who had risen from the ashes of scandal. And yet, Michael Anderson remained a ghost from her past, a reminder of what could have been and what was lost. Meanwhile, Michael's transformation had been nothing short of dramatic. After years of soul-searching, he embarked on a mission to find Emily. At first, his attempts were fruitless. He scoured social media, reached out to old acquaintances, and even hired private investigators in the hope of locating the woman who had once been his everything. Every lead seemed to vanish into thin air. Every tip pointed to nothing more than rumors and speculation. The distance between them was not just geographical but emotional, a chasm widened by years of regret and personal growth on both sides. But Michael was relentless. He knew that his pride and the legacy he once clung to had cost him dearly, and he was determined to make amends. His journey took him to conferences, business summits, and even quiet networking events in cities far and wide. In each new environment, he learned more about himself and about the world that Emily now inhabited, a world of innovation, integrity, and quiet resilience. Gradually, Michael began to understand that the key to finding her was not in searching for the glamorous past they once shared, but in embracing the person she had become. After countless hours of research and many long nights filled with anxious anticipation, Michael finally received a tip from an old business associate who had heard whispers of a groundbreaking company in San Francisco led by a woman with an unyielding vision. The associate described a dynamic leader who was known for her unwavering determination and innovative spirit, a leader whose company was making waves in the technology sector by harnessing sustainable energy. Michael's heart raced as he realized that this description fit Emily perfectly. Michael traveled to San Francisco with a mixture of trepidation and hope. The city, with its iconic hills and the ever-present fog that lent an air of mystery, was a far cry from the opulent halls of the Anderson estate. Here, success was measured by innovation and impact rather than inherited wealth. Michael immersed himself in the local business scene, attending seminars and networking events, all the while keeping an ear to the ground for any mention of Emily Thompson or Verity Innovations. Weeks turned into months, and Michael's search took him to the heart of the city's entrepreneurial community. He met with investors, entrepreneurs, and even former colleagues, piecing together clues about her whereabouts. Every encounter was a step closer to understanding the new world. Emily had built a world that had little room for the old ways of superficial power and dominance. And slowly, Michael began to let go of the resentment and pride that had once defined him. He recognized that true strength was not in the legacy of his family's name, but in the ability to change, to grow, and to seek redemption. One crisp autumn afternoon, Michael received an invitation to speak at a sustainability conference. The event was being held at a modern, glass-fronted convention center in downtown San Francisco. As he prepared for his speech, Michael felt a renewed sense of purpose, a sense that this was not just another business opportunity, but perhaps the moment he had been waiting for all along. The conference hall was filled with innovators, investors, and business leaders, and as he took the stage, he scanned the audience with a mixture of confidence and vulnerability. In that sea of faces, his eyes met hers, Emily's. She stood at the back of the hall, her presence commanding yet understated, her eyes calm and observant. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Michael felt as though he were witnessing the culmination of years of regret and longing, all converging in this singular, electrifying moment. The memory of that long-ago wedding, the hurt, and the humiliation all surfaced, but they were tempered by the knowledge that both of them had changed. After the conference, amid the post-event mingling and the clink of glasses filled with craft cocktails, Michael mustered every ounce of courage he had. He approached Emily slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. As he reached her, the noise of the crowd faded into a distant hum. Standing before her was the woman he had once tried to possess, now a beacon of strength and independence. "Emily," he said quietly, his voice laden with emotion, "I've been looking for you for so long." Emily regarded him with a guarded expression, her eyes reflecting years of growth and the pain of the past. There was silence between them, a charged pause filled with unspoken history. Michael continued, his tone sincere and remorseful, "I know I hurt you. I made choices that I regret every single day, and I want you to know that I have spent these years trying to understand my mistakes and trying to become a better man. I'm not asking for forgiveness right away, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I've been searching for you, hoping that maybe someday you could find it in your heart to let me make amends." For a long moment, Emily said nothing. The air was heavy with the weight of their shared past and the promise of something new. Finally, her eyes softened. "Michael," she said slowly, "I built my life in a way that I never imagined I could. I had to leave behind everything that reminded me of that day to find my own path. I built Verity Innovations from the ground up, and it wasn't easy. I learned that success isn't measured by wealth or status, but by integrity and the ability to rise from your mistakes." Michael's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he absorbed her words. "I understand that now," he said. "I was so blinded by pride and the desire to uphold a legacy that I forgot what truly matters. I've lost so much more than just a marriage. I lost the chance to share my life with someone as remarkable as you. I've come here not to reclaim the past, but to beg for a chance at a future together, if you can ever forgive me." Emily took a deep breath, her gaze steady and contemplative. "It's been a long journey for both of us," she replied. "I left behind a world that no longer fit who I was. I built something that I'm proud of, something that defines me. I've learned to forgive myself for the past, and now I must decide if I can forgive you too. I believe in second chances, Michael, but forgiveness takes time. I need you to understand that my success wasn't just about building a business, it was about reclaiming my identity." Michael nodded, his voice soft and earnest. "I'm willing to wait, and I'm willing to work to earn your trust back. I know I can never undo the pain I caused, but if you allow me, I want to try to make things right. I want to be part of your life in a way that respects who you are and the incredible journey you've taken." That evening, over a quiet dinner in a cozy San Francisco bistro, they talked for hours. They shared the details of their lives over the past 5 years, the challenges, the heartbreaks, the triumphs. Michael spoke of his fall from grace, the painful lessons learned, and the slow transformation of his heart. Emily recounted the struggles of building Verity Innovations, the moments of doubt that almost broke her spirit, and ultimately, the empowerment she discovered in carving out a life on her own terms. The conversation was raw and honest, the kind of exchange that only years of separation and reflection could allow. For the first time, Michael felt that his apology was met with understanding rather than condemnation. Emily, too, felt a spark of something unexpected, a cautious hope that perhaps, with time, they could heal the wounds of the past. As months turned into a year, Michael and Emily began to reconnect slowly. Michael made frequent visits to San Francisco, not as a conqueror seeking to reclaim what was lost, but as a man humbled by his past and eager to support the person Emily had become. He attended conferences where she spoke, helped out at charity events organized by Verity Innovations, and even offered strategic advice when she asked for it. Their relationship was built on gradual steps: a shared lunch here, an evening walk along the waterfront there, each moment serving to rebuild a fragile bridge between two souls that had once been irrevocably split apart. There were times when old wounds would surface. Michael would catch a glimpse of a memory, a harsh word, a cold stare, and the guilt would overwhelm him. But Emily, now a woman who had learned the value of forgiveness, met his sorrow with understanding rather than anger. "I'm not perfect," she would say, "but I'm willing to try if you are." Michael's gratitude was immeasurable, and he vowed every day that he would honor her strength and her independence, never again taking for granted the incredible person she was. Their journey was not without setbacks. There were moments of doubt when the scars of the past seemed too deep to heal, and arguments would flare over trivial matters that masked the deeper pain. Yet every conflict was an opportunity for growth, a chance to learn how to communicate better, to listen more, and to respect each other as differences. Over time, Michael came to realize that his quest for redemption was not about erasing the past, but embracing it as a lesson that had ultimately led both of them to a place of greater maturity and empathy. Slowly, their friendship evolved into a romance that was no longer defined by the glitz of old money or the cold calculations of business deals. It became something genuine, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and the understanding that true happiness is not measured by wealth or status, but by the capacity to love and forgive. Michael began to rebuild his own business, now with a focus on ethical leadership and sustainable growth. His transformation became a model for others in his industry, and he started to earn back the respect he had once taken for granted. More importantly, he learned that true power comes not from legacy or inherited wealth, but from the courage to change and the humility to admit one's faults. As the years passed, Michael's transformation and his persistent pursuit of forgiveness gradually won Emily's heart. After nearly 5 years of rebuilding their connection, the day finally arrived when they both knew that their paths had converged in a way that was meant to be. They decided to celebrate their newfound love and commitment with a wedding that would be the antithesis of their past, a wedding not defined by manipulation and cold calculation, but by sincerity, passion, and the promise of a future built together. The new wedding was to be held at a breathtaking vineyard in Napa Valley, a place that symbolized rebirth and renewal. The sprawling property, with its endless rows of grapevines under the golden Californian sun, provided a serene backdrop that stood in stark contrast to the opulence of the past. The vineyard was a place where nature and nurture met in perfect harmony, a fitting venue for a couple who had both learned to grow from their pain. On the day of the wedding, Michael arrived early to make final preparations. Gone were the days of polished suits meant to display an inherited legacy. Instead, he wore a tailored navy blue suit that spoke of quiet confidence and humility. His eyes, once guarded and cold, now shone with genuine emotion as he awaited the arrival of his bride. Every detail of the celebration had been carefully planned, not as a grand display of wealth, but as a reflection of their journey, a journey marked by struggle, growth, and ultimately, redemption. Meanwhile, Emily had spent the day surrounded by the beauty of nature and the warmth of friends and family who had come to witness her transformation. Dressed in a stunning gown that blended modern elegance with timeless grace, she radiated a quiet strength. Her hair was swept back in a sophisticated style that allowed her natural beauty to shine through, and her smile held the promise of new beginnings. In the soft light of the late afternoon, she walked slowly along a pathway lined with fragrant roses, every step a testament to the courage it had taken to reclaim her life. When Emily finally reached the altar, where Michael stood waiting under a floral arch that stretched across the open sky, there was not a trace of the old bitterness. The vows they exchanged were not mere recitations of tradition, they were heartfelt promises of understanding, commitment, and a willingness to grow together, even in the face of past mistakes. Michael's voice trembled slightly as he said, "I stand here today, not as a man defined by my past, but as a man transformed by the lessons I have learned. I promise to cherish you, to support you, and to work every day to be worthy of the love you so freely give." Emily's response was equally sincere. "I have learned that forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves as much as it is given by others. Today, I choose to forgive, not to erase the past, but to build a future where our love is strong enough to overcome every obstacle." The ceremony was intimate yet grand, a celebration of love and resilience. As the couple exchanged rings crafted by a local artisan, symbolizing the merging of two lives that had been forged in fire and tempered in time, there was a palpable sense of hope among the gathered guests. The vineyard echoed with cheers and the clinking of glasses as family and friends toasted to the couple as new beginning. In the months that followed the wedding, Michael and Emily continued to build their life together with a dedication that inspired everyone around them. They combined their individual strengths to create a partnership that was both personal and professional. Michael, now a changed man, invested in sustainable business practices, using his experience to mentor young entrepreneurs and champion ethical leadership. Emily continued to grow Verity Innovations, expanding its reach globally while maintaining its core values of integrity and sustainability. Their shared life was a blend of quiet moments and grand celebrations. Evenings were spent discussing new ideas over candlelit dinners, planning charitable projects, and dreaming of a future where their love would serve as a beacon of hope to others. Their home, a tasteful blend of modern design and rustic charm, became a sanctuary of peace, a place where the past was acknowledged but not dwelled upon, and where every day was a fresh start. Every anniversary, they would return to the vineyard where they had been married, reminiscing about the journey that had brought them together. Michael would often reflect on the painful days of regret and the long, arduous road to redemption, and Emily would smile, knowing that those trials had shaped them into the resilient, compassionate people they had become. They both understood that life was not measured by the absence of hardship, but by the courage to overcome it, and they were determined to live every day in a way that honored that truth. Their story, once marked by scandal and sorrow, had transformed into a powerful narrative of forgiveness, growth, and unconditional love. The public, too, took notice. Articles were written about the rebirth of Michael Anderson and the inspiring rise of Emily Thompson, but for the couple, these headlines were secondary to the quiet joy of living a life defined not by past mistakes, but by the promise of a future they had reclaimed together. As the years continued to pass, Michael and Emily became known not only as successful entrepreneurs, but also as a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of second chances. Their wedding, once a distant, painful memory, had been transformed into a celebration of new beginnings, a reminder that even the deepest wounds can heal when forgiveness and love are allowed to flourish. In the twilight of a golden summer evening, the couple stood on the terrace of their home overlooking the rolling hills and vineyards of Napa Valley. The gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of ripening grapes and the soft murmur of laughter from a nearby gathering. Michael took Emily's hand, and as they walked slowly together, he whispered, "Thank you for giving me the chance to make things right. I promise to spend every day honoring this gift of love you've given me." Emily's eyes shone with warmth and quiet determination as she replied, "Our journey wasn't easy, but every step has brought us to this moment. We've built something real, something that can't be taken away by money or pride. We have each other, and that is worth more than any legacy." Their story was a reminder that true transformation comes from facing one's mistakes and choosing to grow from them. Michael Anderson, once defined by his inherited legacy and misguided ambitions, had learned that humility and empathy were the true measures of success. Emily Thompson, who had risen from the ashes of a painful past to forge her own path, had discovered that independence and strength are not mutually exclusive with forgiveness and love. In the end, their lives merged into a celebration of both individual achievement and the beauty of a shared future. Their luxurious, heartfelt wedding had been just the beginning, a new chapter written not in the ink of scandal and regret, but in the language of redemption and hope. And as the vineyard's sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over everything they had built, Michael and Emily knew that the road ahead would be filled with challenges, but also with the promise of a love that would endure, no matter what. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss more. Watch our other videos for more compelling stories, and share this video with someone who might find it interesting. See you next time.